Hi, my name is Brianna Motzkis. I'm with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and today we're going to do month 3 of our Color Dance Block of the Month. Alright, so it's been a hot minute since you saw me last, but we are back at it and we're going to do month 3 this month. So these are all I've caught up. Hopefully you've had time to catch up, maybe do some pre-cutting if you've been just kind of working along on what you have in your patterns. But this is so far stuff we have done. We have done the simple pinwheels, the larger ones, and then also these itty bitty ones, and sewn those into the appropriate block settings that our pattern had told us, and also these fun chain blocks that we set off with some super large half square triangles and also one of the pinwheels we've made from month 1. So now we're on to month number 3 and we're going to do some flying geese. Flying geese are pretty fun, so if we look at the back of one of our patterns, this is what we're going to be doing, is just some good old geese, and we're going to do it the traditional way of making these. So it's going to be a stitch and flip method. So before they used to do templates where they would cut a colored triangle and 2 background triangles, sew those together, but there's a whole lot of bias involved doing it that way. So we're not going to do any template cutting. We are all going to do a stitch and flip, which means your instructions have told you to cut a bunch of 4.5 by 8.5 inch rectangles of your colors, and they'll tell you what they were. Now with your color map, if you got a little confused about what tan was number N or what beige was number D, it doesn't really matter. She just tells you, of course, where to put those colors to help mix all those colors in to your entire quilt. So your quilt really looks scrappy, but you're just working off the same fat quarters every month. So we've cut a bunch of 4.5 inch by 8.5, I believe, rectangles of all of our colors, and then also a whole bunch of 4.5 inch squares of our background. Some of you might have a navy background, maybe you do something from home and you've got mixed whites, whatever that is. That's majority of what we have thrown in there with a couple of extra squares to finish up our month for the blocks for the month. You'll notice that we're going to be doing some goose units, which are these, and then we're also going to do some inverted goose units. These are still the same, so even though these ones have a bright color in the middle and background on the outside, this unit right here that we're also going to be making, it's the exact same thing, just switched, where our background is our rectangle and our colored pieces are our stitch and flip squares. So we're going to talk about all of those this month. We can start sewing together all of our goose unit blocks. So let's go ahead and take a look at my table here and we'll start marking and showing you where to sew. So these are all of the pieces that our instructions have laid out for us to cut out. If it's been a minute since you've looked at your pattern, just a quick refresher of how your pattern works. So if you are having the bold kit, your kit looks different from mine. You're going to have more pure, bright colors with a navy background. If you are doing shy colorway like I am, we have a little bit more muted, subdued colors with a charcoaly background. Or maybe you're doing something different at home and hopefully you know the difference between your color pieces and whatever your background is. You'll also see that as she is listing from the cutting instructions, she's going to say from your background, and you're going to cut all of these different things. From color RO or KZ, depending on if you are a bold or a shy kit, you're going to cut the pieces accordingly. So that is just how your pattern reads, and then you flip through the pages and it'll go through step by step on how to create your units. Now, if your first 2 months were a little difficult cutting, remembering where your colors were, all of that, make it whatever is easiest for you. Just because this rabbit egg color is letter Q, it doesn't mean it has to be Q every single time. Because again, she's telling you what these colors are so that your quilt will look exactly like this when you are done. If that doesn't bother you and you're just going to mix and match as you go, and you want to know at the end of the day if you're supposed to have 13 4.5 by 8.5 inch rectangles and you don't care what they are, then it doesn't matter to me either. So again, quilting is supposed to be fun and not stressful, so don't let it be. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to move aside all of these other cuts. This is everything we're going to use to finish the entire month 3 sewing. All we're going to start with right now are the 4.5 by 8.5 inch rectangles. And also your stack of 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch of your background. And it's super simple. You're going to take your background squares. You're going to draw a line on the wrong side of your fabric from point to point. Kind of just like we were doing for our half square triangle units. We're going to draw, and I'm just using a friction pen. This is a friction, I'm doing it in red, which I may have used the last bit of it. Alright, so once we have some of these marked, you can mark all of them at once, do them as you go, whatever works for you. And then you're going to take one of your colored rectangles and you're going to line up your background square on top of the colored square, and your line's going to go into the center. And it can go either way, whether it's in the center that way, but your line needs to go to the center. And then, because you got to think about it, if we're gonna sew, because we're gonna end up sewing right on this line. You know, for half square triangles, we were sewing 1/4 inch for this line. To make a flying goose unit, we are going to sew directly on the line that we have drawn. But when you open it up, you'll have a half of a triangle. So with your pieces, you want to sew all of one side. And it's best if you, I'll need to press that one open a little bit. You'll want to kind of make sure you do it all the same way. It'll make it easier when we get to the end. So whether we're going from center of your rectangle to the bottom corner, or if you're going from the outside corner to the bottom center of your rectangle, entirely up to you. Neither of those directions are wrong. So we'll go ahead, we'll sew this one, and then I'll be right back and I'll show you how to put on the other side. And you really do have to do one side and then the other. And I'll show you when I bring that back. Okay, so I went ahead and sewed those, and I wanted to show you, you could change stitch. So I started up here, sewed right on that red friction line I made, and then when I got off the end, I just left my needle down and then pushed up this next one to sew right on that friction line. And then all I have on there is this tiny little, like 3 stitches of thread right in the middle, but it keeps them all connected, which is kind of nice. Or you can cut your thread each time and do them all individually, and then when I come back to the cutting table, I'm gonna go ahead and just cut them apart and work them one at a time. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the excess. So again, we're going to take whichever ruler is best for you. We're going to line up 1/4 inch on the seam line, so we're going to cut our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So again, line up our ruler. We're going to line up that 1/4 inch mark right with my seam, take my rotary cutter, and go ahead and cut off that excess piece. Again, let me show you that again. Let me come a little closer for you. Let me move these out of the way. So there's our piece. Here comes our ruler. Again, that 1/4 inch mark on our ruler. Take our rotary cutter and slice that off. You can also just use a pair of scissors. All you're really accomplishing here is getting rid of that excess waste so it's not all in your seams later, and also that you have a reasonable seam allowance here. Again, too small of a seam allowance is going to kind of run the risk of your stitches not being very secure when we're pressing and other things. Too much of a seam allowance, not the end of the world. You're just going to have a little bit more bulk in your seam when we sew these units together. What you can do with these, so we will not use these triangles. Again, this is all waste right here. The other thing you can do is, now that they're triangles, take them to your sewing machine and go ahead and sew 1/4 inch across that line right there, and then you'll have a half square triangle. You'll have to trim this down to whatever, maybe a 3 inch, maybe a 2.5 inch half square triangle, and then you can put these in a different project. Make some extra blocks. Have them in your little kit of fabric in case you need to put in something. But if you feel like, oh, that's a lot of waste and I don't really want to throw that away, turn it into a half square triangle unit. Throw it in your 3 inch square drawer, your 2.5 inch square drawer, and wait and use it in a scrappy quilt. So these aren't totally waste, but we're not going to use them again for this project. So once we're done with that, we're then going to go to the iron and we're going to press this open to the dark. Now in my case, my background is always my dark. If you are someone who has a light background, your color is going to be your dark. So you'll of course go the other direction and press this direction and press to the dark. Now pressing the dark is just one of my things that I really like to do, because again, if you're pressing a dark into a light, so let's just go drastic, we've got a black onto a white, what will happen is where your little 1/4 inch seam allowance sits that we're pressing, you'll have a little shadow that you kind of see on the back of your white, and it will be there forever. It will of course never wash out, it'll never go away. So that's why I always say and go ahead and press to the dark, because again, a black pressed to a white will create a permanent shadow that no amount of time washing or anything is going to let it and make that go away. So I always by habit press the dark. Sometimes pressing to the dark may be a little more tedious, harder to do, and sometimes you have no way of pressing to the dark and you only have the option of doing to the light. And that's okay. Sometimes that happens. But if you're wondering, why am I always saying press to the dark? That's why. So once we have that pressed, we have these pressed, we'll go ahead and sew the next one. And again, I am someone who likes to press at each step. It keeps my accuracy a little bit better, and I can see right away if there's anything wrong with the block before I keep adding more fabric or more time into a block. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add another background square. So again, we've got our 4.5 inch square with our diagonal line on there, and we are going to go, again, our line's going to go from the bottom to the center. And again, we want to intersect this one. So of course, when we were to sew on that line, it would look like this, which is a perfect goose block. If we were to sew like this, we now have just a diagonal block, which is not what we are looking for today. So be sure that we are sewing our red line, or our friction line is going through and pointing towards our other background square. The other reason you want to do it one side at a time is you're going to have this perfect 1/4 inch that is going to appear once we sew this together. Let me line these all up correctly. When we sew that seam right there, we're going to have this perfect 1/4 inch. I don't know if you can really see that, but when you sew on there, you'll see that from the point of our color to the edge of our actual block, we're going to have a 1/4 inch. We're going to have a seam allowance, so that when we sew these goose units together, we're going to have perfect points each time. If we were to sew one side, let me show you this one, sew one side, and then before pressing or trimming, sew the other side, when we were to flip this up, get that all done, and flip this up, your seam will impede flipping this all the way up and pressing it all the way out. You're never going to have a full seam right there, because we have stitched over that bit and we've stitched our fabric piece down when it should have been flipped up. So you really do have to do one side and then the other side. Again, one way is one side, doesn't matter, whatever you want to do. And then when you lay your second piece down, make sure that the line you have drawn is pointing towards the background, so that when we sew that together, we create a triangle on the inside. So I'm going to make a few of these, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to put your blocks together and what that second block kind of looks like for you. So I've sewn some of my goose units together. I haven't sewn all of them yet, but I wanted to talk just for a minute about the little guys that we're trimming off from this end. So these little guys, I wanted to talk about these real quick. So if you decide to do nothing with these and they're just going to be tossed into the garbage, or if you're saving scraps for stuffing for dog beds, great. If you are someone who's thinking, no, I'm going to throw them in and make them into half square triangles, because how cool is that? Go for it. However, you're going to want to make that choice pretty soon, because we are going to be working with bias. So again, this is what they look like all sewn together. We can press those and then just square them up to whatever the best size is for you. Again, I think it's going to be roughly it could be almost a 3.5 inch half square triangle, which is not a bad size. We've got a lot of 3.5 inch size blocks that we are making in our color dance quilt. So it's possible that this one might save your bacon later down the road. But you're going to want to sew that down sooner rather than later, because we are working with bias. So bias is, if you look at this, when it stretches, see how much that just like bows and just stretches so much, versus like this side, that's not a whole lot of stretch. Not a lot going on there, but there's a whole lot going there. What's going to happen is over time, the more this little triangle gets handled, the longer it sits, all of those threads are going to start to relax, which means this is slowly just going to warp and warp and warp. So in a couple months from now, when maybe the quilt is all done and now you're getting ready to disassemble your box of goodies to be able to get rid of any scraps you're not going to use, cut up whatever's left of your kit to put into your storage drawers. If you've ever watched Cindy's, how she organizes her fabric, she's got drawers of 5-inch squares, 2.5-inch strips, and when they get full from, making her stash be all pretty, she goes ahead and makes a scrap quilt out of that drawer of 5-inch squares or whatever, and it starts over again. But if you wait that long, these might not be as pretty. Knowing that they don't have to be a certain size, we can trim them to anything they want. It might not be a big deal, but bias is not a fun thing to play with. So I would just suggest go ahead and sew these together. Now that you're sewing with it, they're in your hand in your pile. Sew them up before you put this project away, and then you won't have to worry. That seam will stabilize that bias and no more warping will happen. Once you press this to the dark, trim it up, it will forever and always be a 3 or 3.5-inch square triangle for you, and none the wiser. So my little bias tidbit. Bias is kind of tricky. So once we have all of these goose units sewn together in their individual pieces, you'll of course go ahead and assemble them the way your pattern says. And again, the colors she does, so blue, green, gray, light cream to a more of a yellow to a brown. This is just how she says to put them so that your quilt looks exactly like hers. You can arrange them in any way you want. Doesn't matter. Keep in mind you do have a spacer block, which is just another 4.5 by 8.5 rectangle of your whatever your background is. So you'll have that to complete your pieces. When you sew these together, again, they will all be the right size. There should be no trimming involved, and you really don't want to trim any. If something is super, super off, I would rip out that seam and re-sew it, or just start off with a new rectangle and new squares. When you sew them together, right sides together, you're gonna come across, go from point to point. When you sew this guy, let me move this sort of out of the way. When you sew these together, I'm gonna zoom in here so you can see it. When you're sewing along your 1/4-inch seam allowance, starting here, sewing, when you get to your point, so your seam of course intersects here, this is the point of your goose unit. You want to stitch, 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 and you want to kind of aim so that your needle, your stitches comes right across there. That will ensure a perfect point every single time. If you're a little more out here, no worries, you're still gonna have a beautiful point. A-okay. If you're super, super in here, you're gonna blunt that point right off. Again, if you're okay with that, I'm okay with that. I want you to be happy, and if it's happy for you not to have ripped that out and do it again and do it again and do it again, leave it the way it is. If it is something that you want to have a perfect point every time, that's what you're aiming for, is right between that X will give you a perfect point every single time. And you'll have this beautiful little boop right there. And then press that. Again, press it either way. I would press mine because I have more dark on this side than that, so I'd press my seam to this side. And do that for each one. So sewing these together, super easy, no big deal. Okay, so the next half of the pattern, so we've made our goose block units. When we flip the page, we're going to be making some more half square triangle units to make this cool star block. So if you look at your pattern, what we just made using the goose blocks are these guys and this long guy is what we're making. Next month, we'll be making these smaller ones. But we are making the outside star right here. And then next month, for month 4, we'll be making this little star block to go inside of these big blocks. So we're of course making just the units. So let's go ahead and talk about our next page of month 3. So at the end of month 3, we're going to have 3 flying geese blocks, and we're going to have 2, a large and a small outside star units. And again, we're just making the units. We're not actually going to sew these together because there's actually no center square, because we're going to be making this center square next month. We're just prepping. Okay, so again, half square triangles, been there, done that. These are just a lot bigger. So you have in your pile of cutouts, you've got some 6.5 inch squares. You've got 6.5, I think it's 5 colors. You've got 5 6.5 inch squares of color and 5 6.5 inch squares of your background. You're going to mark your diagonal line again with a friction pen, just a fabric appropriate pen. And again, you can use your quick quarter ruler for this. You'll do your centers and from corner to point, and then also the outside. And then we're going to right sides together, our color and our background right on top, right sides together. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch on both sides of that center line. So we're going to stitch here and then come back and stitch here. So the outside lines are our sew lines, the inside is our cut line. Again, half square triangle like we have done for the last, we did a whole lot in month 1. So if you need to go a little refresher on how that works, feel free to go back. But that's the basis of it, is sew on the outside, cut on the inside. That's going to give you these guys. So again, you can see my red line in the middle and my 1/4 inch seam on both sides, and then you will cut these apart right on that center line. And that will leave you with 2 triangles, 1/4 inch seam allowance that we need to press, again, press to the dark and press to the dark. And here they are, pressed and yellow. So those are our units. And then you do the assembling. So of course the 6.5 inch squares is going to make this big jumbo square. Super cool, super awesome. You'll go ahead and square this half square triangle up to, I believe, a 6.5 inch. Yes, square this up to 6.5 inches. Let me get a better ruler. Here is a 9.5 inch ruler that I can trim with. So again, when I'm trimming my block, let me come a little closer for you. Most of your rulers are going to have a 45-degree line that runs across your entire ruler. Again, line that bad boy up with your seam that you've pressed nicely. Let me go this way so you can see my numbers. And we're going to go to 6.5. And again, with everything Color Dance, it is tight. We are shaving off threads, but it has to be done. Otherwise, our blocks will not come out correct because it will not be a true 6.5 inch square. And then we just went ahead and flipped, line up that line. Again, month 1, we go over this a lot because it's something we are doing a lot. Month 2, I show you the other different trick for trimming. So if you need a refresher, go back to month 1 or month 2, and we cover trimming up blocks quite a bit. So once those are all sewn, you'll see that they are laid up so that our background's on the outside and our colors are in the inside. So again, this way. So if we look at this, it represents this. So if you want to, you can go ahead and sew these 2 together. Sew on the 6.5 inch background squares, make 2 of those, and then just make 2 more of just these. You're more than welcome to do that, or just make all of these individual units. And then when we get to month 4, so here's month 4, and we construct this really cool block, we can sew all of these units together in one big block. But if you have all of the pieces ready to go, it saves you one more step for next month. Okay, and that is month 3. So we're doing flying geese units, some more half square triangles, and again, the half square triangles are to prepare us for next month. So hopefully you enjoy making your flying geese units. Give yourself something else to do. I'd love Goose unit blocks. It's kind of my jam. And we will see you next month for month 4.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.